the Game Week podcast, powered by Keros.
Welcome to episode 1 of the Game Week podcast, powered by Keros, the number one solution for maximizing preparation and performance in elite sport. Every episode will be taking a deep dive behind the scenes of the elite sports world as we chat with world-class practitioners about their stories and how they manage their game week. Okay, Shayne's been working in elite football for over 11 years across first team and academy squads in the Premier League, including Manchester City, Liverpool, Blackburn Rovers and Cardiff City. He's worked with the Wales national team at under-21s level. He's currently working with the Scottish national team. Shayne founded SDM Performance, where he works with elite sports people independently. And as part of his role with City Football Group, he recently led the sports science department at New York City FC for their pre-season. He also works at Setanta College as a master's lecturer. Shayne, how do you fit it all in? You sound incredibly busy.
Yeah, it sounds better than it is. It's. I think I'm fortunate in the fact that a lot of the roles I've acquired over the last year, we'll say, allow me to to do everything, because none of them is full time, if you like. So the Scottish thing, if we take that, there's distinct windows in the year where you're busy, and obviously after that it becomes a little less, so the workload drops, and then what then that allows is then for the master's program to take over. And Man City stuff is more ad hoc, you don't know exactly when that might be, but things might come up. So you're able to fit things in. Obviously at times you have periods where you can't do certain things, but I think that's the kind of design of a full-time consultant, if you like, to try and manage as many things as you can and I'll make sure you have quality. But I think I'm fortunate enough that the way the systems work, where the consultancies work, is that I'm able to kind of give good quality at certain periods of the year, and I'm not kind of spread too thin. Those things aren't happening all at once, if you like.
Yeah, it's nice to have a change of scenery, I'm sure, and you're probably mixing a little bit of business and work, and then just stuff that you're interested in and you're passionate in. I'm sure there's a bit of an overlap between all of those things. But whenever I was rehearsing the intro, our producer said, "Is he a real person?" That's incredible. So you're kept busy and there's plenty of strings to your bow. But Shayne, let's start very, very broad level. Why do you do what you do? Why are you so passionate about having the input in sports teams the way you do?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we were asked this many years ago at City, actually, just to find your why. And initially when I heard it, this is going back maybe 5-6 years ago, a bit younger, and you're a bit more direct, and you're kind of, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this exercise? But you realize there's a lot of utility in knowing your why. And I guess it boils down to me is to help people. That's how eventually it boils down to that. Like, I want to help people. Now that could be from a performance point of view. That could be someone trying to get into a first team. That could be someone trying to come back from an injury. That could be with Setanta College, helping students kind of improve themselves or get the first job. And even, I would say, it matters as much as to help people in pain. Like, I've helped a lot of family people, but who are in pain, who've had shoulder pain for the last year and a half, who've had hip pain for the last year and a half, and that's as rewarding as it is, getting someone into the first team or with the Euros, with Scotland. I mean, they're obviously different elations. You're ecstatic in some of them and maybe not some more, but they're as rewarding as each other. And I guess it boils down to that, just helping people.
And then in doing so, obviously you end up in the position where you actually, I just remember whenever I was coming through as a young fella, kind of just learning the ropes with a professional environment with Ulster Rugby, and the closest person to you is the S&C coach, because you've got so much development to do, and you've got to go from a skinny, scrawny teenager into a professional athlete, and then there's ups and downs, as you say, with injuries and difficulties, and you get very close to the guys you're working that closely with.
I think that's important. I think sports science sits in a very privileged position, and I should remember that. We're not masters, and we're not driving the program, and the coach will pick the team and whatever, but also we have a big impact in performance. And then you sit in between the player and the coach, and the player and the physio and whatever. So you can have this sort of relationship whereby they can trust you. You don't have to feed everything back. You can kind of be on the ground level with the athlete and know his kind of ups and down days. And also he feels that what he says to you is not going to impact too much on the outcome of his selection or whatever. So there can be that nice trust that builds up, and we're fortunate enough that we're important enough for a player to kind of come to you, but we're not too important where a player can't share with you kind of his weaknesses, if you like.
You mentioned there your why is to help people, but the utility of what you do and the transferable skills of understanding the high performance environment and then converting that into a different skill set in a different context, and obviously that's been on display with you kind of going from working for a club and then working as a consultant externally. And before we get into what that looks like, how do you find those skills? Because it's the most typically talked about thing for athletes and people in high performance, converting that understanding of that environment into business. And how does that work for you, or how have you found that transition?
Yeah, it's definitely been a transition. I think when you're in a club and you're in a full-time environment, you kind of stay in your lane a little bit. You kind of have the sports science thing, and that's your kind of remit, and you obviously you go in and out of it a little bit. You talk to physios, you talk to coaches and stuff. But I think when you come out of it, when you remove yourself from that role and that sort of roles and responsibilities, you realize there you have skill sets that transfer across businesses and other sports, and the principles that you learn along the way have massive, they resonate across so many different sectors. And I think once you always deal in principles, the principles can be transferred to other things. Like, so I'm fortunate enough, as you kind of mentioned there, to still be in the elite sport world, but also sort of help out in sort of businesses and even students. I deliver a program to a school about, it's called Being Brave, and the whole thing about it is it's just coaching principles that I've learned over the years to try and help kids, I suppose, develop strategies and develop kind of find their way through this kind of weird time that we're in. But also a unique scenario where kids have got this perfect storm where social media is on the rise and we don't really know the impact of that. Outlets and all that are on the decrease, and we don't know the impact of that. So these kids are I wouldn't say struggling, it's a bit of a strong word, but their identity's been taken away because they don't play a lot of sports. They're not really understanding themselves. They're in this awkward age, and I think they need support along the way. So I think coaching and the lessons you've learned from coaching can transfer and resonate to these kids, and fortunately enough it's been a success so far. But it's interesting to know that skills you've learned can transfer across if you can kind of understand the context that you're delivering it in.
So that's fascinating. So be brave. I'm interested in the kind of philosophy behind that. So you're encouraging these young people to be themselves, to be outspoken, to be confident, to back themselves, I suppose.
Yeah. The brave is an anagram of 5 different talks. So B is be yourself. You mentioned that. R is resist negative energy. Let's talk about social media. And I think understanding the impact of social media is important, because when I was growing up, there wasn't much social media, and then it kind of in the latter year of college, it started to come in, and it didn't really impact my informative years, if you like, or early teenage years and beyond. It was much further in when it kind of introduced, so it hadn't much impact in my development, if you like. But it has an impact now, and I think there's a lot of studies and a lot of good information, a lot of resources out there that we can feed back to these kids and say, look, this is how you should handle it. This is the impact it can have if abused, if you like. And I think more and more that will get more highlighted, the impact social media has on young children and young kids, and we need to kind of identify that and help them and give them the skills and strategies and give them the knowledge really to make good decisions. And then so I go back on the brave. So be brave. R is resist negative energy. A is aiming right. So it's just all around like goal setting and how do you kind of develop the environment to be most productive. And V is value your own time. That's talking a bit about recovery and the science of recovery and how to help yourself recover. And E is to encourage yourself. This idea of motivation and how motivation is always just used as only a positive thing. I think we avoid the fear element, but the fear element is such a kind of natural instinct in us. We all have fear, and we have to use that motivation, that fear of failure, if you like, to drive us forward. If you can have a goal and your goal is at the highest power it can be. So like you say, you want to lose weight, for instance, we take that, everyone kind of had or knows that, what that feels like. Well, if you have a higher power, I want to lose weight because I want to improve the quality of life. I want to be active for my kids or whatever. If you can have the higher power that goal up, it's more likely to succeed. But if you can also have the fear of failure in that motivation. So like if I don't do it, then I'm going to be overweight, I'm going to have illness, I'm going to whatever, all these things. So the fear of the worst case scenario is as important as the positive outcome, because there's a lot of studies behind that. And I just basically share all that knowledge in the best way I can to help these kids kind of figure things out for themselves.
Yeah, that's it. It's the fear can be a powerful motivator, and we would have found that whenever we were playing. We identified that whenever I was playing for Ulster, we went through a period where we were struggling for performances, we were struggling for wins, and then just a couple of wins would just come out of the blue, and they were unlikely. One was away to Munster in Thomond Park.
Right.
Whenever we weren't playing well, it was very, very strange. And another one was in I think at the Liberty Stadium against the Ospreys, when Ospreys were going really well. Two really difficult places to go, and we were like, there's the one thing that you can put that down to is the motivation of fear. And if you don't turn up, then you get absolutely hammered and embarrassed. So that can be a massive thing to bring people together. As you say, worst case scenario. This is very real, and we're staring down the barrel of it. Now we need to get our stuff together and get organized. Otherwise, that's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's so important. I think it's avoided too much, the utility in doing it. Okay, no one really wants to talk about the negative or the bad side of it, but if you use it in the right manner, I think it's powerful. And, you're talking about consultancy and leaving full-time and going out on my own. Like, I almost feel I'm on a tightrope all the time. I'm so close to failure as much as I'm close to success. And if I don't drive myself forward, if I don't get up and do the right thing, no one's looking over my shoulder going, did you do that assignment? Did you fill that thing in? I don't have that. I have to develop a strategy myself to try and motivate myself every day. And there are up and down days, don't get me wrong. But that fear of like failure is a big part of my sort of drive, if you like.
So have you purposefully put yourself in a position where I'm just wondering if it's like the old Conor McGregor before he became the person that we're not that fond of now, the old Conor McGregor where he's just motivated by cash, and he just spends all his cash between fights, and he just puts himself under pressure. I wonder, is there something similar with yourself? Move away from a slightly more comfortable environment where you've got your permanent job to go out by yourself, be self-motivated, and basically be on shorter term contracts. Do you think that you put yourself there because it gets the best out of you?
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know. I think it's definitely something in it. I was very comfortable, and it was a leap of fate. It was a bold move, if you like, leaving full time and a place like Man City. But I think that is a big motivating factor sometimes. And even when COVID hit as well, which isn't a nice thing to hit when you start a business, but it was that idea of like that competitive nature started to kick in. I think I was like, well, I could just let this steamroll me if I want. There's a big chance I could fail. So I think that was quite a motivating part of everything. And I think without that, I don't know if it, like people, a lot of athletes will talk about that as, I'm not comparing myself to Conor McGregor or Michael Johnson or anything like that. But when you listen to those people and they talk about like, they need that sort of. He used to make up competition in his head. Michael Johnson, like he would create scenarios where he was fighting with someone. He needed that sort of anger or that fear or something to try and motivate him to take. And he would pick fights that weren't fights just so he would. So there's something in it, definitely. I think it's in all of us. I don't think it's like just to the elite. I think it's somewhere in all of us. I think it's just our understanding of it needs to improve.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So let's talk about that transition then, and what that looks like for you. So can you give us a bit of an idea, moving away from Manchester City and then going into just working with individuals, individual athletes, but then also offering, your work you're doing at the minute with Scotland football. How do those two balance up? And the touching more so on the individual one, do you see that as a potential model in the future? Is that the way you saw that going, or was that something that was just more suitable to you at the time?
Yeah. So my decision was about 18 months in advance. I'd hate people to think like I had this like eureka moment and one day I woke up and decided to leave Man City. It was like about 18 months in the kind of thought process, if you like. And when I got to it, there was a few things that stood out for me. Is one, I could be a consultant, and there was the international, because I'd done the international stuff with Wales before, so I really like that sort of. It's a challenge in itself. Like, it's got its good and bad side for sure, international duty, but there is a nice challenge to it, and I really enjoy that. So I thought there was an avenue there. There's an avenue with maybe Man City again as a consultant, because they're such a big organisation that the City Football Group is worldwide, and they need people to they need to outsource people. And the fact that I've been there so many years, I kind of know the mantra and I know the philosophy, which helps. But then the other side of it was I was seeing athletes reach out for this external advice, and when you're in the club, you kind of get offended by it personally. You think, why are they not comfortable just getting what we're getting? We're Man City. Why do they have to go and see someone else? Or, I was very much like protective over what I do. And when you see it from the player's point of view, and the player may move on to other clubs, his career is not going to be one. That doesn't really happen anymore, especially in football. He doesn't stay at one club for his whole life. And even if he does, staff generally change anyway. So he's going to get a platter of different philosophies and different mantras and different ways of doing things. And some suit him, some don't. That's what we know this. So the player's like, well, I want something for myself. I want to be ensure that I'm getting the right treatment all of the time. And sometimes, myself, I'll just talk about myself, you're across 30 players. How can you be individualized to every player every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks? It's very hard to do that. Now, you want to do it the best you can, and you're trying to do that's your aim, of course. But players will feel, whether they're in and out of a squad, detached sometimes from the team, or even when they leave, they go, well, there's no support now, what do I do? So from the player's point of view, I could see that trend happening more and more, and these players have more money now, resources, they're more knowledgeable, they want more information, and definitely the likes of Ronaldo and LeBron James and Tom Brady have all started this kind of team within a team, and they all have a team of people around them, which is paying dividends to that player and that individual. So I think it's just watering down, the levels, and I think people are seeing the utility in it. Now, the problem with all that is if the person who's on the other side is conflicting to what the goals are at the club, and there's a tug of war between them, then the player suffers. So if I ever find myself in that situation because I've been at a club, that's when I remove myself, because I'm the problem now. But if you find yourself in a scenario where the player isn't getting as much treatment, or the club are willing to kind of accept this, and you're kind of like an extra arm to their development, their program, then it can be worked really well. I've got some athletes who the club know exactly what I'm doing, and I feed back to them quite regularly, and they're very happy for me to take this on, and they understand that this is the way things are at the minute, but they have it's better the devil kind of thing, so they have a good relationship with me, and we talk about things. So there is that element, but there's also on the other side of the spectrum where, if it's going to come to a head, then it's best me or whoever that person is to remove themselves, because the club's the club, the player is the player that exists with and without me. So you know what I mean. So I think finding that balance is really important. It doesn't work for everyone. Not every player needs that extra support, but there are players who do seek it, and I think it's definitely a trend that is across a lot of sports now.
Do you think that will continue to grow? It'll continue to go down that route, or will that be for a particular type of athlete who has a specific set of needs and requirements? Or do you think that might be something that becomes more and more normal then in the next few years?
Yeah, I remember being at Blackburn, I won't say the player now, but there was a player who was getting treatment from an external person inside the gym on a treatment bed, and it was crazy at the time, but that's happening more and more now. And the trend hasn't gone down, the trend has gone up, if anything. And especially with Ronaldo doing it and other people will follow that mold naturally, so I see it going up, but I've seen it plateauing as well, I think, and all these things kind of run in cycles. But I think if it's the right person and it's the right team of people and it's done in the right way, I think it can be very effective, because the club can benefit from it also, because club men are very busy, they can't do everything. So if there's a kind of a support network there, I think it'll be very harmonious. But if it's not, then it can be detrimental. So I think it'll continue to grow. I think it'll continue to happen. But because players, if you like, they become more and more narcissistic. It's more about me. Like if you ask a player now, what would you rather win, the World Cup or a Ballon d'Or? They'd probably say Ballon d'Or. Whereas 10 years ago, they would say the World Cup, So, yeah, that's impacting the decision as well, to kind of get my own person.
I wonder if they always players have always wanted to win the Ballon d'Or more than the World Cup. But to your point earlier on, maybe they're just being more brave. They're being themselves. They're being more outspoken. and just saying what they believe.
Maybe.
I'm interested, Shayne, in what you were saying there about players being more empowered and having more information, having more knowledge and understanding of what makes them tick. How has that changed in your journey in terms of what information you give players? Do you feel like players can cope with more data, for example, more information, more understanding of what they're doing, or is there still a school of thought out there like Mr. Miyagi? Just get him to do something that he doesn't quite understand, but I know where he's going, and it's all in control.
Yeah, I think we've gone too far sometimes. I think we've given too much information. Sometimes ignorance is bliss, and just keeping focus on what the game is, and in the background you can continue your own development of the player. And like I've made mistakes before, even a young athlete going through his peak height velocity. I don't know, so that's just a growth spurt that they go through, and it can lead players into a very, very kind of weird place. They suddenly are this coordinated being, and then they go through a peak height velocity and they're horrendous for a period of time. They're losing balance. They're like Bambi and ice. You hear all that kind of, and I remember telling the player to go, look, don't worry, you're going through this peak height velocity, this growth spurt, you're going to come out of it, you have to keep working hard and all that. And the player kind of settle down and think, oh, I've handled that really well. And then 2 years later, he's training like a bag of crap. This player, he's a good player, he's still playing, and he's playing at a high level. But I remember, and he's training like a bag of crap for a long time. And he's 18 at this point, and he's about 6'2", and he hasn't grown in the last 6 months. And I said, what's going on with you? And he said, I think I'm going through another growth spurt. And I was like, so he's used that as an excuse for him, rather than him saying, well, no, it's just me. I'm in control of what I do, So I think we've got to be careful of giving too much information. If the information is going to help, then of course maybe we feed it back. But sometimes the player is better off just focusing on a few things as opposed to hearing everything, Yeah,
isn't that where the value of knowing the player and knowing the individual comes in, though? What we were talking about at the start, being close with these guys and just spending time, it feels like you're not getting much value from it if you're not actually doing something active or training or coaching something specific. But just getting to know guys puts you in a position to know this player will react well to this piece of information and won't react well to that. So the example in rugby would be, and to your point earlier on about social media and exposing yourself to the dangers of social media, it can also be a tool. So there's some players out there who struggle with confidence. They need, you played brilliantly today, that was great today, you're our best player, you've done this, that, the other. And then they'd be very susceptible or very vulnerable to the other side of things, the criticism of social media, and just in general, just knowing the players and knowing how to engage with them and how to get the best out of them.
Yeah, that's really important. And unfortunately, what I've seen what happen is staff are becoming busier because there's bigger projects, clubs are growing bigger, there's always meetings now, there's a lot going on. And I think what's lost in that is the relationship with players, like sitting down having a coffee with a player is seen as like, that's not work, get on your laptop, you know what I mean, do more. But that's as important as filling up a spreadsheet, you know what I mean? That's far more important than really building that rapport with a player. That's a very, very important thing, because I would hate, and I've done it in the past, looking back, like I should have spent more time with players more often. I did the best you could, of course, but you've also had so many other things to do. And I think that's really important. If you find that someone once told me, like, write down all the players in your squad list. So you write a list of 30 players or whatever, and then go at the top, then just do the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and just write in how many times you had an interaction with the player, and like not just hello, like a meaningful, like even just how are you. So just note and binary times how many do it, and you'd be so surprised how often and how little you interact with so many players. You interact a lot with some and very little with others, and nothing at all with others. And it was kind of you just do it for 1 week and see if you had an interaction with one player in 1 week, and you probably be scared of how little you communicate sometimes with some players. And it's important that you have that relationship, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be powerful and it can be useful. At times whenever you probably don't expect it to be. So I'd be keen to find out about your experience with Scotland then of late. Obviously an incredible achievement, qualifying for Euros, and how have you found that transition and moving into that environment? And I'm interested to hear how there's an emotional attachment to everybody, really, every single staff member feeding into that performance on game day. Is that watered down, or is that just as strong whenever you come in as an external consultant, or how does that look in your experience?
Yeah. I think not saying the more emotional you're involved, the better, but certainly you need to feel part of it. That's important, and I think you feel part of it by how much you contribute. If all you're doing is just kind of filling up water bottles and ticking a box, and it's hard to feel part of it. It's like the analogy when a team wins, and if you're sat on the bench, it doesn't feel as good as if you were the starting 11 or if you scored a goal or something like that. So you don't want to be a bench player. You want to be contributing as much as you can without going over the top. And Graham Jones, who's head of performance, is very good at keeping people involved. He's got a nice setup there whereby everything kind of filters to him and he feeds it back, say, to the higher powers, if you like, to the coaches and everyone else. But there's a nice involvement from a sports science point of view. Like we continually monitor players. We're doing it now. We're just noting how many minutes every player's played. If they got injured, are they injured? How many times when are they back training? So we're constantly monitoring that and feeding it back to the coaches. So we're building a picture all the time of the players. So that's like, there's a lot of pre-camp involvement. You know, when you get on camp, then there's less chaos because you've done a lot of planning. You've fed so much information to the coaches. They know exactly what each player's done, what they're coming into camp, how many minutes they've played, frequency of games, when the last game was, what their normal match day +1, match day +2 is. So, you know, you've already kind of painted a good picture, and then after that, then your delivery, gym work, warm-ups, whatever, then add to the whole equation. But I think it's a nice setup, and maybe fortunately that I'd done Wales before. I understood what international breaks are like. You've felt you've had an influence without being over the top. You know what I mean? Without being the master. The coach is still was the king, and he decides what they need to be doing. But you fed good information into him to make the best decisions from a physical point of view. So I think from that point of view, you've felt involved. I mean, if you weren't doing that and you were just coming in, you know, for 10 days and that's it, and going away for 10 days and nothing, you wouldn't feel as part of it, or you wouldn't feel like you're as important maybe, or you're not getting across the information that you could present. So yeah, I think that's important. You feel involved, you feel part of it, and I definitely do with Scotland. But that's been building a long time. The success of Scotland has been the 3 years prior to me joining. I've been fortunate enough to, in the latter end, join the story, if you like, and hopefully you've had a good impact on things, you know.
But there's nothing more powerful or no tool kind of better than the opportunity to be a part of a moment like that, to kind of feel like you're getting involved and getting to know the guys and being kind of sharing that experience together brings you straight in, I think, and it can accelerate that process, I would have thought. How do you find the difference in environment or the difference in atmosphere between a national camp and a club, you know, kind of week to week? Is there an added excitement or buzz or anticipation, or is there a different kind of energy?
Yeah, I've only been there, say I started in, the first camp was September, August sort of camp, so I've done 3 and going into my 4th now, and there's always been a nice buzz around the camps. I think players feel like Scotland are on the way up. You know, there's opportunities there for players to expose themselves on the international scene that maybe they wouldn't get at their clubs if they're for lower clubs, and then for the clubs that are the highest, they've the point to prove on the international scene, because it's always talked about, you know, the best players, you know, they're good for the club, but how are they for the country? So there's always that sort of, they always continually want to prove themselves. And sometimes it's nice for players to come into a different environment. It can be more relaxed initially, but these games are very, very important, and they're looked upon a lot. And like with a major competition like a World Cup or a Euros, it's a very nice buzz. And I think now, as of late, having qualified, I think players are eager to kind of get themselves on the team sheet, and there's a nice atmosphere, and obviously that's driven by the coaches and the players, but there's never this over the top feeling. I think, you know, people are just excited and enthusiastic what the next step it looks like. And for 22 years, Scotland haven't been here before, so everyone's excited, but everyone's sort of kind of continuing to do the things that got us success in the past.
And how does the feel of the week change as you get closer to game day, or how does the atmosphere or the buzz or the energy change on game day than it does to the rest of the week?
Yeah, I think for myself, like, you're always conscious that you just have to keep things consistent. I think, the closer you get to game day, the kind of more you kind of standing off a little bit from a physical point of view, because obviously you're around recovery protocols and everything else. But I think the worst thing you can do is start changing or being different around game day, because players pick up on everything, and players only have so much attention span like every other human being, and you don't want to add to their attention away from the game. And I think sometimes if you start doing that and start dropping in new things or new ideas, or it can be a distraction to the players of what's actually important. And I think it's like this. I have this kind of idea, or the science behind it would be like this sort of receptors that we have in our bodies, right? We're always picking up, we're always detecting changes in the environment, right? Whether we believe it or not. If you went into a room and someone removed a chair, you'd realize that chair has been removed straight away, like without even seeing it. You just know things have been moved in a room. And it's the same thing with players. If you start changing environment, you start mixing things up around game day, but say for instance when we played Serbia, if all things were suddenly different, the players know it's different, and players know the importance of the game. If you start adding to that change again, you're just adding to the anxiety, you're adding to the pressure, so you just have to keep things consistent. You keep your warm-ups the same, you keep them in the same area, you keep doing the same things, you don't try new things. You're the consistent. There's no change there. That should happen. It's just the same as every other game. I think that's important for me as a practitioner to do, and Steve Clark and his team are very good at that. There doesn't seem to be any hype around it. It's just, the game is the game. The players are professional enough to know how to handle it, and it's up to them how they want to prepare in their own way. But we keep things consistent. We don't change anything dramatically. Maybe change it with the food, different carbohydrates and that kind of thing. But typically it's, you stay consistent and let the players deal with it in the way they want to deal with it.
Yeah, there's it's almost like players are superstitious, but it's like a subconscious superstition. Like it's not even an awareness. In my experience as a player, like if you go into a new changing room, if you arrive in a new environment, and wherever you decide to go with your bag, to stick your bag to change on day one, day two, for the rest of the time that you're in that facility, you wouldn't dream of changing somewhere else. It's just, that's your program, just to go back to the same place, and you don't even realize you're doing it. As you say, it's not an awareness. It's just a trivial example of somewhere you change as part of your routine, kind of building towards ticking boxes in your performance, in your preparation for your performance. But have you found players are kind of slightly superstitious with stuff like that, with their routine?
Definitely, and we all play a role in that. It even goes, it goes up and down to the coaches, down to the laying out the kit or whatever. All that should be the same, and it should be. The players shouldn't have to think, if the shin pads weren't there, that they normally have the shin pads on the boots, then you put the shin pads on the boots because there's not an extra worry. I know it might seem trivial, but anxiety or whatever it might be, or nervousness or whatever, it's like a threshold. They're going to be so nervous. What they shouldn't be is tipped over that balance where it becomes detrimental to performance. And we all play a role in that. If suddenly now, because I want to go out 10 minutes earlier, just to make sure I tick every box. The players are, why we come out 10 minutes early? Yeah, I'm making a silly example. You'd never do this. But that alone can be enough to just trigger something off in them that it takes them away from what it actually is. They're going to drive their own importance of the game, and we shouldn't be changing anything in our remit, in our practice, that's going to add to that nervousness.
What about if you felt like the team did need a change up, if they were going through a little bit of a rut, or they just couldn't quite click, or there was something just a little bit missing? Would you ever change something up on purpose just to maybe just stimulate something different in terms of performance?
Yeah. So that deliberate sort of idea behind it is obviously important, and I think that comes in more with the club than it does with maybe the country. But if the country are going through a period of time, that's always going to be driven by the manager. I would never take on that responsibility to do that without conferring higher up and then seeing, you know what I mean. I wouldn't take on that decision myself. I think that would be, we there is merit in it, and we've done that before in club environments. But it's always come from a manager. It always come from top down. And it might be even be in training the day before or whatever it might be. In different ways, you might want to stir up things. If things are becoming a bit stale, things are coming a bit like people are getting a bit comfortable, even comfortable losing, then there is there is obviously a necessity to change. But when things are going okay and things are going well, you know, mixing it up, then okay, I mean, some people would say there's, you know, if it's not broke, then you have to change it because you become too comfortable. So you have to change the environment to kind of make sure it doesn't become broke, if you know what I mean. So it's a tricky balance to get right. But I think from my end, when things are running smoothly, you just don't want to add to that anxiety unless it's deliberately decided by coaches and the other team to mix things up. But yeah, it's a hard one to talk about because it's always about the context you're in and the performance of the team and where the team has been and where the team is going and who are the characters in the team. But yeah, I think it resonates more at club level than it does in country level, if you like.
Yeah, club level is more of a routine. It's more of a kind of week to week. You come in on Monday, every day kind of looks the same. Whereas there's a natural change for international camp, I suppose. But Shayne, listen, thank you very much for coming on the Game Week podcast. Very good of you, very generous of you to give up your time. We know you're a busy man, but thanks a lot for coming on, and good luck with the next Scotland Camp World Cup qualifiers. Is it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, in March. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Hopefully, we're back to some sort of normality. Get this vaccine in, and we'll get.
Yeah.
There'll be no more remote podcasts. We'll start doing these in person.
Yeah, great. Cheers, Andrew.
Cheers, Shayne. Thank you.
Take care.